Jessica stared down at the creature as it locked its sights on the children again. Oh, you don't. Jessica picked it up as it started to crawl. She held it over the pit and it turned its head around completely to face it with its ant-like eyes. Its little rosebud mouth opened, flashing two rows of pointy predator's teeth, then snapped shut, chomping the air. Jessica shuddered and dropped it, watching it grin fascinated as it turned its arms and legs, digging itself deeper into the pit. Jessica, Marlo cried, and she spun around. Lights had come on behind them, illuminating a large show stage with a bright purple curtain as its backdrop. On the stage and on the spotlight was a glossy and white foxy animatronic, its mouth open and arms wide, ready to perform for a cheering crowd. The fox looked down at them with delight. Was that there a second ago? Jessica whispered. Suddenly, the fox's body began to crack apart. Metal plates split away from the center of its torso from its arms and legs, lifting out, splitting again, and folding back, leaving only its canine head untouched, grinning maniacally as its body was horribly transformed. Jessica ran to the children as all at once, tentacle-like metal limbs erupted from what had been Foxy, and the mutilated skeleton creature stretched out into its new, semi-arachnid form. Get them out, Jessica cried, and Alana and Ron were frozen into the spot, staring, and Marla slapped their cheeks lightly. Ron snatched up Lisa's hand, and together they all ran for the front door. Jessica, Marla cried as they reached the door. We can't let it get out. The creature was on top of the monkey bars now, elongating itself to terrifying proportions as if showing off its tangled metal spines. Get them out, Jessica shouted again, pushing away from them, then turned her attention back to the mangled pink and white fox. The thing began to slowly dismount the monkey bars, its limbs slipping over and around another, changing its shape with every step it took. Its fox-like face and its vaguely human one were both intended on the children, the heads angled slightly toward each other so that each of its eyes could focus. Jessica took a deep breath, then pulled the earpiece out of her ear, struggling to steady her hands long enough to slip it into her pocket. Over here, she screamed loudly as she could, her throat going raw as the canine head ducked under neck, and its eye rolled around to fix on her. Yeah, over here, Jessica cried, her voice hoarse, and the thing came down from the monkey bars with menacing grace and began to slink toward her. She glanced around, should have thought this through. At the door, she could see Marla bracing it open, shooing the children through one at a time, then looking back to Jessica. Jessica nodded her head and waved Marla away. She grabbed a folding chair from a nearby table and hefted it over her head, then flung it at the creature, and landed it to a clatter on the floor, missing the thing entirely. The fox had caught to the side, its mouth hanging open to show all of its teeth. Then it lurched forward, its metal appendages banging against the ground. Jessica turned and ran. She looked around widely for her escape as she darted through the mass of tables at the center of the room. She shoved under a table behind her, but the thing just climbed over it like it was flat ground. Jessica sped up. The creature was right behind her. The fox had snapped its jaw as the unskinned skull grinned ghoulishly from its wing. She raced back the way she came, ducking between the cotton candy machine and the popcorn cart. The sign blocking the doors was still in place, and as she flung it away and yanked the door handle, it rattled in place, but it still wouldn't open. Something crashed behind her, and Jessica spun around to see the popcorn cart knocked over. Popcorn strewn across the black and white floor tiles. Uh, Not exactly. The creature stretched out a limb and pushed the cotton candy machine experimentally. It rocked, but did not fall. Then another limb shot out. It hit Jessica's leg with a smack, and she tumbled back against the door. An individually shout of pain blurred from her mouth. The fox and the unskinned head looked at each other, the head bouncing on its cables. Then, in Uzian, they turned their eyes on her as the creature undulated its limbs, displaying their full extension. Jessica felt to her pocket for the earpiece but couldn't find it. It must have fallen out while she was running. She darted her eyes from side to side, afraid to move even her head. She was cornered, caught between the wall and the children's climbing set. There was no way past the thing. All at once, the creature seized the cotton candy machine with three of its limbs, crushing it, shattering glass, sprayed on all directions as it carelessly flung the machine aside. Jessica shielded her face, turning away, and the machine cracked the floor tiles behind her. She saw it. The red and yellow bars of the playset nearby lit above the room below, where a colorful pipe maze began, bolted tight to the ceiling and disappearing into a circular hole on the wall and into the next room. That's my way out. Jessica set her foot on the bottom rung of the playset and started to climb as fast as she could. Below her came a wrenching noise, and she glanced down to see the creature tearing up the playset, the unskinned head swinging and bobbing gleefully. It reached up and tore out the rung below her, and she climbed faster, hurling her upper body into the tube as just as one of the creature's hands grasped as the last piece of the playset. Jessica scrambled for her handhold as at last managing to pull her full body inside the tube. She crawled as fast as she could, the pipe shaking with every movement. Then stopped to look down. Although some of the plastic tunnel was bolted to the ceiling, there were large portions that were not. This was made for kids, not me. Jessica rocked herself carefully, and the section of plastic below her rocked as the plastic segments creaking at the seams. Jessica shivered, slow and steady. She checked her hands and knees, making sure they were safely in place. Then started forward again. She was in a narrow, unadorned tube, hovering above an empty hallway, lit by a single exposed fluorescent light that hummed as it flickered. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed to grow louder as she made her way cautiously along the fragile plastic flooring, filling her ears almost painfully as she had gone deep underground. She worked her jaw open and shut, trying to clear the sensation, but the noise persisted. When she reached the segment of tubing that went into the wall above the door, she hesitated, trying to see inside, but there was only darkness. Jessica took a deep breath and carefully crossed into the next room. Silence fell. The humming noise was blissfully gone. The only light was behind her, and bizarrely, it did not penetrate into the room, as if it were somehow being filtered out. She looked back and saw the circle of light where she had come, but everything else was in darkness. Jessica blinked and waited for her eyes to adjust, but all she saw was black. Okay then, she shuffled slowly forward, feeling carefully and sliding her knees along the support beams that ran along sections of the tunnel. After a few minutes, she came to a turn, bobbing her head gently onto the plastic, and as she felt her way around with a vague sense of accomplishment. A point of orange light appeared below her, and she startled, her hands slipping off the support beam and rattling the plastic. She caught her balance, but her heart racing, and a pair of green lights appeared a few feet away from the first one. They vanished. They reappeared, and then another pair. Purple sprang out of the darkness beside them, and this time Jessica saw the dark pinpoint of the center of each circle. Jessica tensed with an awful recognition. It's more than just more sets of colored lights appeared. Eyes, more eyes. The room below was slowly filling with sets of eyes until it seemed impossible that so many creatures could fill into such a space. They all stared upward, unblinking at Jessica. She moved slightly forward, her hands shaking as they found their way along the beams, and the lights followed her as she went. Don't look down. Jessica set her gaze on the darkness in front of her and shuffled on and on for what felt like ages. Each time she glanced down, there were more pairs and pairs of watchful eyes, all of them wrapped on her progress. Jessica shivered. She moved faster, still feeding carefully before she could slide her hands and knees along. Then the tube curved slightly and a circle of dim light came into view. Jessica crawled for it as fast as she dared. The tube swayed precariously as she moved. She crawled through the hole and turned back. The room was in darkness again. All the eyes had vanished. Jessica shuddered, revolted, then looked down at the room she now hovered above. The light was dim and unsteady, flashing orange colors at intervals, but she could see clearly, peering down. Jessica saw what was coming from the carnival games that filled the room, some flickering noiselessly and others giving steady light in every hue. She took a deep breath and looked ahead, trying to see where the tube led. I really hope there's another way out, she thought, and started crawling again. The plastic tubing rattled as she went. The only noise in the dark room, Jessica swallowed as the adrenaline waned. She was beginning to remember how much she hated enclosed spaces. Just keep, just keep moving. She reached a split in the tubing. One way snagged around the perimeter of the room, the other through another wall into the pipe maze bolted to the ceiling of the next room. She scanned the room, then made her choice. She took the turn, taking the tunnel that fed through the neatly cut hole in the wall. Anna found herself back in the main dining room. She paused and listened. There was no sound of movement in the dining room, and she craned her neck to look down through one of the orange plastic pans. Searching the area, the creature was nowhere to be seen. She had not noticed the plate pipes that covered the ceiling before climbing into them, but now she saw the extent of them, with no end in sight and no way down. The playset she had climbed to enter the tunnels was utterly destroyed. How am I going to get out? She cast her eyes helplessly over the maze, tracing the paths she could take, and suddenly she saw it. The pulpit where she had thrown the baby crawlers was across the room. It had a canopy made of climbing rope that stretched 15 or 20 feet above the floor. The tube went directly over it. Jessica took a deep breath and crawled further out into the room, bracing herself. She made it to the first turning point, and suddenly the pipe shook. She paused, but the structure shook again and again. The light was being obscured from below her, and Jessica looked down. The unskinned skull grinned up and at her with yellow eyes, suspended below as if with nowhere. The head swiveled sideways and eventually up and over the plastic tunnel. Jessica looked up in dread and saw the body of the creature right above her. Its limbs wrapped around the tube like a monstrous squid seizing a ship. She shifted a scream and her heart skipped as she fought not to hyperventilate. The fox head lowered to eye level and snapped beside her, and she screamed and sighed away. Her hand hit the plastic floor between the support beams, and the segment fell straight down. Jessica clambered back before falling with it and quickly took a corner, heading off to a new direction. The fog's head swooped upward in a blur and vanished. Jessica crawled in into a straight line, keeping her eyes fixed ahead. The structure continued to shake, and she could hear plastic breaking behind her, as well as large segments of the pipe maze crashing to the ground. Soon she reached the ball pit, and she stared down at the canopy of ropes through the bottom of the tube, hesitating. Now what? The structure shook again, but this time it was different. This time it trembled as though someone or something were in the maze with her. The entirety of the structure swayed and rocked on the bolts it hung from. Jessica kicked out the plastic behind her, bracing herself to the sides of the tube as she looked down. Something moved in the pit below. Three of the crow's heads were above the surface, staring up at her distant body with blank eyes and oozing they snapped their little jaws, and she stalled, hitting her head on the top of the plastic tube. Stupid babies, she muttered. Then she looked down again. They were back in motion, swimming through the balls and snapping apparently at random. Jessica shivered and froze, suddenly paralyzed at the next step of her plan. For a moment, she prayed that it wasn't too late to just stay silent and wait for danger to pass. The structure trembled again, this time over and over in rapid succession. A spiral of shimmering metal flew through the tunnel. Then she saw a gleaming fox's head. Its mouth opened in an impossible smile. Jessica screamed and fell sideways through the hole, landing heavily on the rope canopy. It sank inward, giving her a split second before she began to slip downward. She grabbed wildly at the net, the ropes burning her hands and entangled her feet when she got her footing, and scrambled back up the slope to the top, wrapping her hands around the metal support bar. She watched the hole in the bottom of the pipe that she had fallen through, expecting something to come out, but nothing did. There was motion in the pipes, barely visible through the thick, faggy plastic. Jessica searched in panic, trying to locate the creature, but there was movement everywhere. Every pipe seemed to be crawling with life. When she realized all of the movement was flowing in the same direction, Jessica followed the flow with her eyes, through pipe after pipe, all the way up to the plastic end cap just above her. With a crash, the end cap burst out of place, and bullets rained down from the sky, hitting Jessica in the head. The fox head beamed down at her. More of its body pushed its way through, and more limbs emerging as it balanced itself delicately on the edge of the pipe, like a cat preparing to bounce on a mouse. Something fell out of Jessica's pocket with a ding. It was the earpiece, which must have been wedged into her other pocket. Jessica held steadily, finally fumbling to retrieve the earpiece. The fox head craned sideways as the last piece of the monster exited the pipe and joined the rest of the metal mass, perched like a vulture in the rickety infrastructure of the pipes. Finally, the fox lunged. Jessica crammed the earpiece into her ear and jumped as the creature slammed into the netting where she had been, its limbs showing through the spaces in the net. Jessica landed on her back on top of an arcade cabinet, then fell to the floor below with a thud. The wind knocked out of her, and she wheezed, the creature struggling to free itself from the net. The limbs writhed, then the whole body sank down with the net, tearing it out the frame as it went. The creature was stuck, its limbs tangled in the mesh. It thrashed and flailed, and its long, snake-like appendages lashed through the air. The net rocked back and forth, straining its bonds, then gave way in an instant. The thing dropped straight down into the pit, sending colorful plastic balls splashing over the sides of the pit. It twisted frantically, still tangled in the torn netting. Then suddenly it began to twitch. Jessica watched, wide-eyed, as the bound creature slowly sank into the ball pit with a sound like metal grinding. After a moment, it vanished entirely, though the balls boiled up fizzling as the gnashing sound continued. Briefly, she caught a glimpse of a black-eyed crawler, chewing contentedly. She drew in a shaky breath, then ran for the front entrance. Jessica burst out the double door and into the cold night air, and swaying on her feet. Excuse me, are you all right? Marla asked with alarm. Excuse me, I'm fine. Jessica looked at each of the children, confirming that they were all there, all safe except one. Carlton, do you have him? She forced herself to smile. So, who wants to visit a police station? Carlton crept quickly down the hall, scanning the walls and floor for signs of struggle, of anything that would indicate something had passed through. There was another door a little way down the hall, and he paused outside it, carefully turned the knob while staying outside the frame, bracing himself. He pushed the door in and waited. Nothing came out, and he cautiously peered inside. The room was completely empty. calm before the storm, he whispered to himself, and the door shut. When he reached the tea in the hall, he paused. Where are you, kid?